For this project, I'm making a skirt. I found this deep purple corduroy material. It feels little bit heavy, which is going to be really nice because I love wearing skirts, but the winters are a little bit cold where I am, so I'm looking forward to having a warm skirt to wear. And for the pattern, I'm using a pattern that I created by reverse engineering a skirt that I have. I turned it inside out and I made the pattern out of it. So I'm gonna cut this pattern on the fold, and I'm gonna cut two of them, and then I will start cutting out the other parts of the skirt. This skirt is going to include pockets and also a ruffle at the bottom. For the pockets, I've made some pretty large pockets just because I like to have them to be really roomy. These pockets are 14 inches long, and the tops of the pockets are 7.5 inches wide. For the ruffles at the bottom of the skirt, I have cut 3 strips that are 26 inches wide and 3 inches high. And I cut them in this way so that the grain of the fabric is going to be the same as the rest of the skirt, so it should match up pretty good. Okay, now that the fabric is all cut out, what I'm going to do around the edges is doing an overlock stitch. This is a stitch that's going to prevent the ends from fraying, and it's also going to give a little bit of structure, which will just make it easier when I actually do start sewing together the pieces. And what I've noticed about this particular fabric is that it frays really easy. You can see it already starting to fray, and the fabric's only been cut out for a couple of days, so it seems to be fraying on its own really easily. Usually when I do these stitches, I'll do it as close to the edge as possible, but I've noticed with this particular fabric, I end up losing the stitch if I don't at least put my needle about an 1/8 of an inch into the fabric. So I've been kind of meticulous about it. And this particular fabric is a stretch corduroy. It is 97% cotton and 3% spandex. You can see it's got a little bit of stretch to it, and there's a real big variety in corduroy. But I thought the stretch would be good and would make an interesting material for a skirt. I'm just getting started with the pockets. What I have done so far is I have pinned the pockets together, and the right sides are facing each other, and I have marked a 1/4 inch seam with my very trusty marking pencil. It's water soluble, so it'll wash off really easy. And the opening for the pocket, I'm making it 7 inches. and I've marked it with 2 pins just so I remember to stop sewing. And the stitch I'm going to be using is a double stitch. I think the double stitch is a really good stitch, and it'll make it really sturdy. I think. Slightly more sturdy than just a simple straight stitch. So you do 1 stitch and then you go back on it a little bit. And I think this back stitch is really good for seams or anything that's going to get a lot of wear and tear, and definitely don't want to have to redo your stitching. So I think the double stitch is a really good stitch to do. It's called a double stitch, but sometimes I end up calling it a double back stitch, which is not accurate at all. And what I'm going to do is continue with this stitch until I have made it all the way around to the opening, and then I will do the same thing on the other pockets, and then I will be ready to start sewing some more pieces together. Now I'm sewing up the sides of the skirt. I measured 3 inches from the top of the skirt, which is where the waistband will be, and at the 3-inch mark I've pinned the pocket to the side of the skirt. And now I'm going to do a double stitch down the sides of the skirt, also for the pockets as well. And I will use this double stitch on both sides of the skirt. For the ruffle at the bottom of the skirt, I had cut the ruffle into 3 pieces, and I've sewn the pieces together, and I'm using a double stitch to do that. And the next part is to actually work on the gather. So what I'm doing is I'm using a long basting stitch, and I'm going to stitch this long basting stitch along the entire ruffle. And when I'm finished stitching the long basting stitch, what I'm just going to do is pull the fabric so it's in a gather, and it should match up really nicely to the rest of the skirt. I've gathered and pinned the ruffle to the skirt, and now what I'm going to do is a whip stitch to secure the ruffle. For the waistband, I am using a 1/2 inch elastic, and I made the casing about 5/8 of an inch, just to give it a little bit of room so I can thread the elastic through it. And I pinned the waistband, and what I did is I left about 3 inches just to give me plenty of room to thread the elastic through when I'm done stitching up most of this waistband. And the stitch that I'm going to use for the waistband is a felling stitch. How I do this felling stitch is I'll grab a few pieces of thread on this side and then pull the needle through. I think of this stitch like an invisible kind of stitch, because it shouldn't show too much on the other side by doing this, which is what I'm looking for. I figure on the waistband I don't need to be seeing my stitches come through. And I will just continue with this stitch until I make it all the way to the end. Now it's time to insert the elastic into the waistband. To do this, I have fastened a safety pin onto the end of the elastic, and now I'm just going to thread it through the small opening here. And just getting it started is usually the hardest part. But once you get in there and kind of get in the motion of it, it's not really too bad. And I didn't leave a whole lot of space, so this might take a little bit longer than usual. But I didn't want to give the elastic too much room to move around. If you give it too much room, it might end up getting twisted, which never makes for a very comfortable elastic waistband. So what I'm going to do is continue to thread this through until I reach the opening, and then I will be ready to try it on and cut the elastic and complete the waistband. For the hem, I turned the end of the fabric over about 3 inches. It turned out to be much longer than I had anticipated. And for the sewing, for the stitch, I'm going to be using a whip stitch. And this is the stitch that I'm going to be using around all of the fabric here. And the nice thing about stitching up the underside of the fabric is that it doesn't have to be pretty. I think it just has to be secure enough so that it's not going to snag on anything, on boots or on furniture, that kind of thing. But other than that, it doesn't have to be a pretty stitch, it just has to be a secure stitch. So I think this bit of stitching will go a little bit quicker than, say, the waistband. And after this stitching is done, I will be done with this project, and I will show you the completed skirt in the next section. This is the finished skirt. My favorite part of the skirt is definitely the ruffles. Again, for the fabric, I used a corduroy, which is a kind of a stiffer kind of material, and I love how it kind of made a poofiness to the ruffle at the bottom. I think that's a really interesting element to the skirt. And overall, I'm very pleased with this skirt. I think it's going to be warm for the winter, which is why I chose the corduroy. And thank you so much for watching, and please like this video and subscribe to my channel.